Okay, so very good. So my name is Jim Leap. We're here today at School Road Farm. We're going to be looking at some cover cropping planting techniques, basically bed prep and planting techniques. Got a small kind of homestead scale farm here. I've been in this business for over 40 years now. Had my own farm for 15 years in the Central Valley, doing mixed vegetables, and then I had the opportunity to work as a farm manager at the University of California Santa Cruz farm, which is a kind of a teaching, demonstration, research farm. Did a lot of cover crop work there and a lot of cover crop research, and then went down and worked in Salinas Valley with USDA with Dr. Eric Brennan. Again, kind of working on cover cropping systems and reduced tillage systems. So we've had this little farm here for 10 years now, and I've just developed a bunch of systems that are basically based off of all of my work at UC Santa Cruz as well as my work in Salinas, and we're doing a range of different crops. Because we're such small scale. We're set up on 48-inch centers on the tractor. This tractor does all of the kind of infield and bed prep work. So its tires are 48 inches center to center. We do, as I mentioned, we do a range of different crops. In this particular block here, this was spring grains. So I'm just going to demonstrate kind of a standard bed preparation following the crop and moving into cover cropping. So on this 48-inch system where we use a single bed, this is a very critical tool. And in Salinas Valley, this would be referred to as a break bottom. It's I call it a 3-bar cultivator, but you could also call it a furrow chisel. It's basically running chisels in the furrows and followed up by sweeps in the furrows. It's basically just breaking the wheel compaction from the previous crop. So it's just dropping into the furrow. You'll see it kind of do its thing. It's just cleaning out the furrows and breaking the tractor tire compaction. Just demoed the break bottom or the furrow chisel tool. So we opened up those chisels, broke the compaction in those furrow bottoms, basically the wheel compaction. Now the next step in this process of setting up this bed for cover crop planting in a kind of a reduced tillage system is the use of this undercutter. This is got a lot of different names too. People call them weeder bars, undercutters. Very inexpensive, very simple to build, incredibly versatile tool. You could even refer to this as horizontal tillage. It's great for managing weeds, especially in a fallow situation. If you have perennial weeds, it'll undercut the large rooting structures or the stolons of weeds like Bermuda grass, Johnson grass. So a really important tool, especially in this system here. And I've used these a lot with, this is my recommendation for any vegetable system. Once you're done with the crop, get it flail mode and get it undercut. And then it can sit there because you're going to halt your weed growth. But in this scenario here, I've already actually undercut this bed, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm gonna run it through a second time. But this would, it just loosens that bed and It takes care of any weeds that would persist through the winter, and just, yeah, makes a nice friable bed for planting cover crop into. Tool number 3 here in this series of tools that we're using for pepping these beds. This is a standard ring roller. I've converted it to 3-point. I used a pull behind here for a while, and it was clear that it wasn't going to work for this application. But so we've chiseled out the furrows, broken that wheel compaction. We have undercut to eliminate any potential weed growth from anything that happens to be there that's already germinated, and or perennial rooting structures. And we now, it typically in a bed that has not been tilled, it would tend to be kind of there'd be some structural integrity to it that would kind of hold those clods together, just through aggregation and just good soil structure. So I want to, my goal here in prepping this for planting cover crop, I'm going to come in with a drill and drill the cover crop. So I want those, I don't want those compacted blocks in that bed. So the ring roller definitely takes care of that. And it just gives me a nice flat, uniform, and kind of mellow surface for the grain drill to then just come in and drill. You would probably combine all 3 of these operations into one operation, where you would have an implement that would look like this. It would have a maybe it'd be a little bit longer, but you would have the chisels, and then you'd have the undercutter, and then you'd have the ring roller. So you could just do everything in one pass, which would really be preferable, because the more we run up and down these furrows, the more we tend to powder the soil in those furrows, and then those. We want to keep those open. We want that rainwater to infiltrate easily, and we don't want to break those aggregates too much. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward. Okay, we're just going to demo very quickly here a very quick calibration process that's always a good idea to do when you're planting, especially a large block, and you only have so much seed. You really need to kind of get your calibration dialed in. And then once you do this, you're kind of good to go, indefinitely. At least you kind of know you've got a ballpark to shoot for. But it's always a good idea to do this, especially if you're doing a research trial. This tire, I know what the circumference is, so I just mark it with a piece of tape. 10 revolutions of this tire is going to be the equivalent of 55 feet in the field. So I've just put enough seed in here to cover 2 drops. And obviously the more drops you do, the more accurate you're going to be. But I'm just going to spin this 10 times. So that's the amount of seed that we get from 55 feet from 2 drops, and we just weigh that and then do the math. So we get out our handy smartphone here, we weigh that, we've got 0.188 pounds. That's 2 drops, we've got 8 drops total, so we just multiply by 4, and then because the drill is drilling a 4-foot width by 55 feet, we know how many square feet that is. It's basically, it's a 198th of an acre. So we're going to multiply the pounds by 4 to get the number of drops, and then we're going to multiply by 198 to give us the equivalent pounds per acre. So we'll see how this works out here. So according to my smartphone here, we're going to be planting roughly 148 pounds per acre, which is right about where we want to be. Generally speaking, whenever I do a calibration, just a kind of like we've done by just rotating the tire, generally speaking, when we take it out to the field, we'll be planting just a slightly heavier rate. And I don't know if that's just because of the vibrations or what, but so I want to be in that range somewhere 150, 160 pounds per acre, so this is perfect. So if we wanted to change that, we just change the slider, and that changes the metering and increases or decreases the rate of distribution. So this is our mix. Cayuse oats, bell beans, common vetch, purple vetch, Dundale pea. And the most important thing when you do a mix, and when you do a legume cereal mix, you want your oats to be a relatively small percentage of the total. So here we're at about 10%. In a perfect world, I would prefer that to be closer to like 7%, but 10% is okay. Anything greater than 10% in your cereal mix with a legume cereal blend, the grass will dominate, especially, or the cereal will dominate, especially as you plant later and later in the season. When conditions get a little more challenging, it's always going to be the cereal that's going to outperform the legumes. And I've definitely seen situations where even at 10% you'll end up with what looks like a 90% stand of cereal by the end of the season. So you got to be really careful with this. And you'll notice this is a mix, right? So it's bells, peas, vetch, oats. The mix will hold. I mean, it's going to come out uniformly in the drill. The smaller seed isn't going to necessarily move to the bottom or anything. So these mixes stay very uniform as a mix. So in the mix here, we've got bell beans, the larger one, and then the Dundale pea, and then the vetch, and then the cayuse oat. And this mix was pre-inoculated. So we've got the legumes require, they don't necessarily require inoculation, but if you do inoculate the legumes, you have a potentially higher nitrogen fixation rate, because the nodules that actually help us get atmospheric nitrogen into the soil are, if they're not present in the soil, we inoculate the seed, and that just gives them a little bit of an advantage. Okay, so we've just done the 3 separate passes here. We broke bottoms, opened up the furrows, we undercut, and then ring rolled. So obviously there's been no inversion of soil here. I just kind of wanted to show you that drill is going to have a very easy time getting that seed into this bed, even though there's pretty heavy residue here on the surface. It's it should cut right in. But you can kind of see how loose and friable that is. And yeah, should make a good seedbed. And the furrow's open too. You know, the two most important decisions you make, well, there's a lot of important decisions when it comes to cover cropping, but the key really to success is in timing, and you never know in the fall, you know, when's the perfect time to plant. October 15th historically has always kind of been the, you know, the promoted date or the preferred date for establishing a cover crop in California. So we're now, what, first week in November. We've had an exceptionally dry fall. There haven't been any rainstorms yet to date. We've had, you know, zero precipitation. It's our best shot is kind of looking at the long range weather and then making an informed decision to the best of our abilities. There's a 50% chance of rain here this coming weekend, and talk of a potential, you know, next storm. You don't want to get into a situation where you hold off and then you get rained out, and that can happen. But in the ideal world, you'd want to plant after the first rain, so you get some moisture in the ground, you germinate some weeds, you do the process that we just did, you kind of clean up your seed bank. In this situation, this year, we're going in dry. I don't like to do that, but we're doing it. In the ideal situation, we would have had enough rain moisture now to actually germ this seed from the residual moisture in the soil. That's when you get your best results in terms of weed management, because with this drill we can plant to moisture and we could get a beautiful stand without any weed pressure whatsoever. We'll probably, so my bigger concern, I guess, with my timing this year is going in dry. We'll probably have a little bit of weed competition, but depends on the weather, it depends on how warm it is, how cool it is, as to what happens. But with that higher rate, the cover crop will most likely be able to outshade or outcompete any weeds that do come up in that understory. So we'll be able to follow this cover crop along as we go. But it's, yeah, you just take it each season as best you can, and we'll be talking about this at time of termination too, you know, in terms of optimal timing. Okay, so now we're ready to plant. We've done all the bed prep or the post-crop kind of soil preparation, keeping the residue on the surface and doing as minimal a job of tillage as possible. So now we're going to go in with the little drill, and you'll notice the drill is set in terms of depth. The outside drops that are actually going to be in the furrows are set lower, so we'll do a really uniform job of planting that whole bed. So we're not just planting the bed top, we're planting the entire width of the entire 4-foot width of that bed. And we're planting at a rate of about 150 pounds per acre, which should give us a pretty nice stand. A legume cereal mix that we just looked at. And it's always a good idea, you know, anytime you're coming into the field, especially in the fall like this, the drill's been parked. There's a good chance there's spider webs in the tube, so I've cleaned all that stuff out, blown air through it. But it's always a good idea just to kind of give the tire a spin, just to make sure each drop is dropping, and I can see that it is. Yep, each drop is dropping, so we're good to go. Yeah, it was just to review a little bit. I mean, you've got the other video, but we planted into a what had been cereals. The cereals had been mowed sometime late summer, and the residue just left on the surface. And then we chiseled the furrows, undercut the beds, and then ran a ring roller, so there was no soil inversion or mixing of residues. So it's kind of a reduced till approach to planting cover crops, and it clearly it worked very well. As we said, the cover crop was drilled into these beds November 5th at a rate of pretty close to 200 pounds to the acre. I think it was 175 was the drill setting. But I did run the drill a little bit slow, and I think it's probably more reflective of a 200 pound per acre stand. It was a LA Hearn mix, Soil Max mix, which is very heavy on the legumes and about 10% cayuse oat as the cereal component. And you can see, and I'm not sure if what's going on here, but it's probably weather related, because we have had a very cool winter. And potentially some it could be a soil condition component too, maybe a tie-up of nitrogen that the legumes just really were able to kind of outcompete the cereal. Typically in a 10% mix, you would see a higher percentage of visible cereal this time of year. So we're very high on the legume, which is okay. I'd rather have more cereal, but this is going to be a big shot of nitrogen for the soil. So anyway, yeah, that's just a little background on the mix and why we're looking at such a heavy legume stand here. We've got a very nice stand. We did have an extremely dry December post planting, November, December post planting. So we got a light rain, just enough for the seeds to imbibe, but I was really concerned about that deeper moisture, and concerned that, once that radicle emerged, it was probably just going to be going into dry soil. And so I did two, fortunate enough to be able to, because we're on beds, I just rolled out drip line, and it just moved it across the beds. It didn't take much time at all, but I put down 2 applications of 1 inch each. And then since then, now we've had 9.5 inches of rain. So we're looking at, 11.5 inches, 12 inches of irrigation, which is good. It's our average here is more like 16. So this is an interesting year because we are so light on precipitation. And we have had a relatively dry spring. The storms have been kind of intermittent, so we've never had any large significant rainfall events. So that's a benefit in terms of the way that the moisture enters the soil. We don't have in a typical year, we're dealing with soils that are, at this time of year when we want to be incorporating, we're typically dealing with soils that are a little too wet. Now we're dealing with soils that are a little too dry, but at least they're uniformly dry, which is nice. So there's advantages and disadvantages every way. And my concern now, obviously, is this cover crop is transpiring a lot of the deeper moisture. So it's going to be a little tricky here dry farming this year, because it is dry. But the benefit is we're just going to be very kind and gentle on the soil. There's not going to be any potential for compaction or clod formation. And you'll see that once we start the spading operation. And even just tractor traffic on the field is not as detrimental in these drier soil conditions. So I can kind of do a demonstration dig here to just show you what we're talking about in terms of soil moisture. You don't want to work the ground too wet. You don't want to work it too dry. You want to, because we are going to be primarily dry farming here, I want to hold as much of that residual rain moisture as I possibly can. So I'm always on this, it's always a very tight balancing act to kind of make that call, like what's the best day to terminate. And I think this being the pandemic year, I had my second vaccination last Thursday. Last Thursday was probably the perfect day for mowing and incorporating. But I had the shot and I wasn't feeling so well, and so it got pushed back to Sunday, which is okay, but every day we lose another tenth of an inch of or even a warm day like today, we could lose potentially 2/10 of an inch of moisture, which isn't that big a deal, but it's always a very difficult decision. And it's not really based on any one thing. You kind of want to do the best you can for the soil, but you want to hold as much moisture as you can, and you want the cover crop to incorporate really well and to break down and in the ideal scenario, you would, like, just given the moisture right now, I do have fairly good deep moisture. I know the cover crop has wicked a lot of the moisture out of the zone of incorporation. So when we incorporate it, we're going to have a fairly dry soil in the upper 10 inches. In the ideal world, then we would get we'd get a nice low pressure trough and a couple of rain events in April that would give us 3/4 of an inch, maybe an inch of rain. That would be perfect. That would reestablish that moisture, and then we'd come back at that point and form beds, and we'd be in really good shape. Short of that, probably would have to irrigate. So yeah, this is pretty straightforward. I'm gonna flail mow just to get my particle size down to a small uniform size that's easy to incorporate. Otherwise, I'll have long stems and it'll be kind of a mess. So that's a pretty fast and pretty efficient process. It's kind of like, it's the equivalent of putting this cover crop through a blender. It's just going to cut it into little tiny bits. It's a flail mower, so it does a really good job of macerating, basically. And then I'll come right back after the mowing and run a mechanical spader that will just do a very nice job of uniformly incorporating that residue, leaving the bulk of it in the upper soil horizon, which is really nice. And we can talk a little bit about that once we get going with that process. But and then I won't do anything here for at least 2 weeks. And in that 2-week period, I'm hoping for a rain, but if I don't get a rain, I don't get a rain. And then once that cover crop, there is enough moisture to start the decomposition process. Once that cover crop starts to decompose, then I'll come back in with a combination rototiller bed shaper and form beds. Termination. I generally, I cover crop as much as I possibly can. We're kind of rotating between winter grains and then just summer crops that are mostly commodity type crops. We do dry farm tomatoes and hard squashes, garbanzo beans, dry beans. We've been doing a mix of different things: buckwheat, sunflower, flax. So I'm not really, when I do the cover crop, I plant as much as I can in cover crop, and then termination is just termination. It's not really, no decisions that I'm making right now would necessarily relate to what I'm coming back on here in terms of cropping system. I just want to get this, incorporated in a timely fashion and broken down. And then get beds formed, and then we can kind of make decisions about where things go. A lot of times based on the soil condition and potential soil moisture, but it's usually pretty uniform. So it's more about most of our decision making in terms of what we plant next in this block would just be looking back at the history and just kind of being mindful of rotations and breaking any potential disease cycle, that kind of thing. So I'm not even sure. I mean, I haven't even really looked and thought much about what's going in here, but it's probably going to be dry farm tomatoes, winter squash, and dry beans. And then in another cover crop block here, we'll be doing spring grains. We're here on the what we call the Central Coast of California, right? We're just I'm 15 miles to the ocean. We're in the Pajaro River drainage here, or canyon, so we do get a significant maritime influence up the Pajaro. We'll get fog. Well, historically, we have gotten fog in the summer evenings and early mornings to kind of moderate the temperatures. We've had the last few summers have definitely been warmer, but our typical daytime high here in the summer would be, 85, 90 degrees. We do get higher than that. So that does allow us to do the, and like I said, we typically get 16 inches of rainfall, but this year we're looking at 9.5. To date anyway. Always hopeful that we'll get more. So it allows us to do, based on our soil type and our proximity to the ocean, it allows us to do a whole range of different crops with very minimal irrigation input through the summer. The most common dry farm crop in our region that would have a pretty significant economic component to it is the dry farm tomatoes. And there are a lot of small farms in this region that are doing specialty marketing of dry farm tomatoes, and they do very well with it. So that's the main crop. I kind of push it a little bit by doing, we're not really a commodity crop area because land prices are so high. We're a high value. We're raspberries, strawberries, and lettuce and broccoli. Farming area, so there aren't a lot of commodity crops, but I really, because we have a small combine, I really enjoy doing the smaller blocks of what I would call a commodity type crop, but we're a good example is dry beans or garbanzos or we can do those very effectively without any irrigation at all. But we wouldn't, that would never be an economically viable endeavor unless, it is for some small farms, and it is farms north of here in the Pescador area are doing small blocks of dry beans and doing very well with them. The little indicator, the walking with the shovel is the most informative, but another little indicator that you can look at, and you'll typically see it on field edges and things, you'll start to see the bell beans stress for moisture. They're usually the first ones to kind of show it. And that'll usually be either in the dry spots or around the field edges. And once you see that, you kind of got a pretty good idea, okay, we better get in there and do some tillage. Every year, just in kind of considering when to terminate, I think that this is the most important tool right here. And I'll usually, a block like this, I would take various samples throughout just to get an idea of overall uniformity, but I've already kind of determined this is a pretty uniform year. So typically the bottom end of the field would be wetter, the top end would be drier. But I like to walk in a ways, so just kind of clear a little area here. And these are on beds, so I want to be sure to get into a bed top. And I usually just I'll go to the depth of the shovel. And yeah, this is very dry. It's really dried up significantly just in the last couple of days. This is just Thursday when I did this, you could still ribbon. But this may be a particularly dry area too. Let's do another one. Yeah, this is a little wetter. This is absolutely optimal for what we're doing in terms of tillage. It doesn't give me a lot of hope for good deep moisture for dry farming, but I know at least that we're not going to harm the soil by driving a tractor on it. So this is good. See, we're not going to smear anything, or we're really going to. Typically, if I can ribbon it, I'm always a little bit concerned, and I can't really. So this, I would say, this is about as perfect as you can get in terms of soil moisture for tillage, for incorporating cover crops. Love that. Look at that. You can form a clod, but you can very easily break it apart. So yeah, doesn't get any better than that. Okay, so we're ready to jump in here with the mowing. I'm going to use a 3-point Flail mower. It's got fine cut blades on it, but it works fine for cover crop. And because of the amount of residue, I'll be taking it pretty slow so I just don't bog things down, but it should go pretty smooth. We've mowed with the flail mower, so this is what we've got. We've got a bunch of chopped up cover crop residue, for the most part cut into nice manageable pieces for incorporation with the mechanical spader. It's the flail mower does a nice job of kind of uniformly laying things down, much better than like a rotary mower. But we always have this issue where the tractor's running ahead of the mower, so the tires push down cover crop ahead of the tire. So we'll always have that kind of problem, but that shouldn't be too big an issue. We're also on beds here, and that's a little bit of why we are seeing some of this, but that's okay. So this would be a real challenge to incorporate with any kind of typical tillage implements. This would be very difficult with it would be relatively easy with a very large, high horsepower offset disc with big disc blades and with notched blades. But anything short of that, it's really hard to get this much residue effectively incorporated while maintaining your soil structure. So that's why we're going to use the well, I mean, that's the advantage of the spader, which we'll demo next here. This is the mechanical spader we're going to use to incorporate the cover crop. It's a reciprocating spader, and it basically just has shovels that do this as it goes through the field. So it's going to go about a little less than 1 mile per hour. So it's pretty slow operation, but it's a single pass, and it's got a lot of advantages. The main advantage is it's not a compacting tool, so it's not causing soil compaction. The other advantage is there's no traction requirement for this whatsoever. In fact, if I put the tractor in neutral, the spader would actually push the tractor forward. So most tillage has a traction requirement. So the tractor really needs to be heavy, and it really needs to move the implement through the field. Whereas it's a 3-point implement, but it's a PTO operated implement. So it's kind of minimal in terms of traction requirement. It does require roughly 10 horsepower per working foot of spader to operate. In this situation here, we've got a 5-foot spader and a 40 horsepower tractor, but the soil is mellow and it seems to work good. But in certain soil conditions, you may need that full 10 horsepower per working foot. But the main thing you need is some form of low gearing on your tractor to allow you to run full RPM and run at somewhere in that 6 to 8 tenths per mile per hour speed range, which is not that common for tractors. So you do have to make sure you match the implement with the right tractor. And yeah, it's not a compacting tool, and it's very gentle on the soil and very gentle on the aggregates. And like I said, it's a single pass operation. So it's one of the better ways to manage this type of residue in terms of getting it incorporated. The other real advantage compared to other tillage options is that it's very, I can work a small plot like this very uniformly. I can go right to the corners, right to the edges, whereas with most tillage implements like a disc, you can't do that. The disc is only working really good once it's kind of into the field a ways. So you can't get corners, you can't get edges, and you'll move soil around. Whereas this one, I can till this whole plot here and have it come out to be a perfect square plot of uniformly tilled incorporated residue, which is a real advantage for either a research farm, a research plot, or for a small scale farm like this. Yeah, so it's PTO operated. The PTO is running a gearbox which is turning this. Basically, it's a crankshaft. You kind of think about this as like a crankshaft in your internal combustion engine, and these would be the pistons. So the pistons are going up and down, and the spades are the pistons, but they're coming. They go down and then they swing back, and they go down and they swing back, and it allows for a real nice mixing of residue into the soil, but it tends to keep the bulk of the residue near the surface. Very, very different than like a moldboard plow where you're inverting and burying residue, or even a disc where you're making multiple passes and chopping it up. So it's a very, it's really one of the better tools for what we're trying to do here. It's lofted up.
Yeah.
And this is a problem. When I come back to do beds, I will keep my tractor tires only in one zone, because once you break those aggregates and disrupt that soil structure to the extent that we have, then just kind of think about it in terms of like bulk density. Now that we've kind of broken everything apart, now we really have the capability with some weight to compress it.
Yeah.
And we want to avoid that at all costs. So I'll just make beds, and the tractor tires will stay in those furrows, and nothing stays on that, or nothing causes any compaction on the bed top. So you could take a soil probe and just push it right in. There's no bottom to it. So there's no compaction. The only compaction we'll be dealing with from this point on is just the wheel traffic, or the furrow bottom and the wheel furrow.
So how's the maintenance on the spader? It's got a lot of articulation.
It's got a lot of bearings and seals, and I just keep it lubed. And if you're in abrasive soils, the spades wear pretty fast. So I make sure I keep the spades hard faced on all the cutting edges. But on a little farm like this, with my kind of friendly soil, this machine will last indefinitely.
Yeah.
But if you take this machine out to a big farm in Salinas Valley, it's not going to last very long.
Is your soil friendly because of what you've worked with it, or was it friendly to begin with, or?
Oh, it just doesn't have a large sand component.
Yeah.
So it's gentle on steel, as opposed to like the soils in the Salinas Valley, which are it's basic. A lot of it's just decomposed granite, and it's really hard on any steel that has any soil engagement.
So if you had a sandier soil, is there something you would recommend as an alternative? Or?
If you had a sandy soil and you wanted to use a spader, you just need to hard face your spades every season, or in the case of growers that I do know who are using spaders on sandier soils or more abrasive soils, they just change out their spades more often.
Yeah.
So
you're adding iron to the soil.
You're adding iron, exactly. Exactly.
Well, thank you very much, Jim Leap, for hosting us again, and really an informative visit.
Great, thank you. Yeah, glad to assist, and